Hello everybody and welcome to another React tutorial for beginners. In this video, I'm going to be covering the lifecycle methods in React and then hooks/useEffect as those relate to functional components. So lifecycle methods are what you're going to use for class-based components, and then hooks, specifically the useEffect hook, is what you will use for functional components. Now, the point of these is to allow you to have some more advanced behavior for your components. So essentially, right when your component loads, can you run something, right? Or when your component is kind of being destroyed, so no longer going to be rendered on the screen, can you run a cleanup operation? That's what these things allow you to do. And well, the best way to explain it is to really just give you an example. So I'm going to start with the class-based components because that allows us to kind of build a foundation for how useEffect actually works. However, if you're familiar with class-based components already, then skip forward in the video. There'll be some timestamps in the video player. All right, with that said, let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is just make a new component because we don't have a class-based component. So I'll just call this class dot, and then this will be JS, and we're going to make a class-based component. So we're going to say import, and actually I think I can just import React from, and then this will be React. Okay, now what I'm going to do is say class. We'll just call this class, or you know what, we can call it test. Say class test extends, and then this will be React.component. And we will start by defining a constructor. So we're going to say constructor. This will take in some props. And what we will do is set some state. So we're going to say this dot state is equal to, and we'll just have a super simple example. We're just going to make this a counter because this is the easiest example I can come up with. So we'll say this dot state, and then count is equal to 0. Okay, we're going to define our render method. So we're going to say render, and what this will do is just render a button. And so we'll make a div here. We'll say /div. Okay, so now we've got our div. What I'll do is say button. I will say class is equal to, or class name is equal to, and then this will be btn hyphen primary. Let's end our button. Let's say click me. And now let's make a method that we're going to run when you actually click the button. So we'll make a method here, and we can, what should we call this one? Let's say clicked button. Okay. And inside of here, we're going to say this dot set state, and we're going to set the state so that the count is equal to, and then this will be this dot state dot count plus 1. So we'll just increment the count by 1. Great. So that's all we're going to do inside of clicked button. And then we can do a console dot log. We could say clicked. Perfect. Okay. Now right above the button, I'm actually going to do a p tag, and I will just put the number of times that we click the button. So I'll say clicked. And then this will be this dot state dot, and then not clicked. This will be count. Okay, so we're going to show that. And then here we need the on click. So we're going to say on click is equal to, okay, and to avoid having to bind this button, what we're going to do is just have an arrow function. So we'll just have an arrow function, and then we will just manually call clicked button like that. So this dot clicked button. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I think I've gone over this before, so I'm not going to really explain this any further. There we go. We now have our component. Okay, so what I'm going to do is render this component. So let's go to app.js, and let's just render it at the bottom of the screen. So we need to import it first. So we'll say import, and then this will be test from, and then ./class.js. We don't need the .js though, and I need to export it. So I'm going to say above here, export default class. Okay, nice. Okay, now we have that, so we can render it. So we'll go down here. I'll just put it, I don't even need to put it in a row. I'll just put it down here. I'll say /, and then this will be test like that. Okay, and while we're at it, let's remove this style red from this add item component here, because I don't want that to be red anymore. Okay, failed to compile, React require render return. Okay, so let's go here. I forgot to return something here. So I'm going to say return. I'm going to put a parenthesis, put another parenthesis, and now this should actually work because, well, we forgot to return this JSX. There you go. Okay. It's also saying this is not allowed before super. I forgot. We need to call super. So we'll say super, pass the props, and there you go. Now we are good to go. All should be working. Let's save. Okay. Looks like we are good. All right. Now what I'm going to do is go here. Let's scroll down. Notice we have clicked and click me. And when I press it, it updates here. Now it's telling us we're getting a little bit of an error here. What's the problem? It's saying uncaught reference error, must call super constructor and derived class before this or returning from derived constructor. Okay, I think that was just previously we're getting that. Let's refresh and click me. Yeah, okay, so that was just a previous error. But anyways, you can see this is indeed working. All right, so that is great. However, now I want to talk to you about the life cycle methods. So we've done the setup. Now I can talk to you about them. So the first method I want to discuss is something called component did mount. Now, this is a method that you can define in a class-based component, and essentially this method will run when your component first mounts. Now, what does mounting mean? Well, your component is mounted once it has performed its first full render. So here I'm just going to say console.log mounted like that. But essentially, this allows you to have an operation that you can perform right away once your component is rendered to the screen. So this is really cool because this means, for example, you could look at a database, you could call some network operation, whatever. As soon as your component is first mounted onto the screen, you can have this method run. You can do whatever in it that you would like. Now, it's hard to come up with a good example right here, but there's many, many times when you need something like this. Anyways, let's see how it works. So if I go here now, go to inspect, let's drag this out, look at our console here, let me refresh, and notice it says mounted. However, every time I press clicked, it doesn't say mounted again, right? It's only the first time that this component is loaded that it immediately says mounted. And there you go. Now I can press click me a bunch of times. So that only runs one time, again, when this is first rendered. Okay, hopefully that is clear, but that's kind of how that works. Now, remember that every single time I click the button, I have to re-render the component because the state is changing. And well, that's what happens. When you change the state, the component's re-rendered and then shows the new state. And so even when I'm re-rendering the component, it's not printing mounted, only the very first time that it runs. Okay, so now that we've covered that, the next lifecycle method I'm going to show you is called component, and this is did update. So component did update like that. Now, all of these are pretty intuitive as to what they actually do, right? If I hover over this, it might say called immediately after updating occurs, not called for the initial render. There you go. So it tells you exactly what this is going to do. So every single time the component is updated, that essentially means the props or the state of the component have changed. This function right here is going to run. So inside of here, if I say console.log and I just say updated like that, let's see when this actually runs. So let's go here. Let's refresh and notice we get mounted but not updated. And that's because on the very first render, that lifecycle method doesn't run. However, when I press click me, now notice it's going to say updated and clicked because every single time we update, that lifecycle method runs. And so inside of here, if you want to do something every single time an update occurs, well, you can do that, right? Again, can't come up with a great example for you right now, but that is what this method does. Okay, so that is great, but the next lifecycle method I want to show you is called component will unmount. Now, this one is pretty similar to component did mount, but this is saying, okay, the component is about to be destroyed. So we're no longer rendering the component, it's about to go away. And in this method here is where you would perform what's known as a cleanup operation. So a lot of times, once the component mounts, what you'll do is some type of operation like subscribe to a video feed or call some endpoint, whatever. You do something, right? And once this component's going away, you want to clean up whatever it is you did. Maybe you subscribe to a video feed and now you need to unsubscribe from that video feed. Whatever. There's a lot of times you need to clean something up. That's what you would put inside of here. So once the component is going to be destroyed, you can see here called immediately before a component is destroyed, perform any necessary cleanup in this method, such as canceled network requests or cleaning up any DOM elements created. Exactly. That's exactly what you can do. They can explain it better than me. And so inside of here, I'm going to say console.log and I'll say cleanup like that. Now, the only thing is we need some way to actually delete this component, which is not necessarily intuitive. So what I will do is just write a little bit of code here to show you how we can actually see this working. Essentially, rather than saying this dot clicked button, actually, I will leave that method here. But what this method will do is this will call a method that we're going to pass through in the props here that will just destroy this test component. So what I'm going to do is make a piece of state here. I'm going to say const, and I'll just say show test, and then update, or I guess we could say set show test is equal to use state. This will be false, or sorry, true by default. And then what we will do here is we will say we're only going to show this if we have show test equal to true. So if show test, so show test question mark, show that. Otherwise, just do nothing. So we'll just put a null there. That means we're not going to show anything. Okay, so show test question mark, then we will show test, otherwise null. And what we're going to pass here is we're going to say destroy is equal to, and then this is going to be set show test. And so what we can do is we can use this destroy method and set it equal to true, and then that will set the show test equal to false, which will destroy the component. Okay, hopefully that's clear. I've already showed kind of how this stuff works a bunch of times, but this is a good refresher. So now if I go here, I can do clicked and I can update the count, fine, but I can also say props dot and then destroy, and then I can pass this equal to true, or actually false, I guess. And what this will do is make it so that this component gets destroyed. Doesn't really make sense the way that I'm reading it, but hopefully that's clear. We'll have a look here, and you can see when this is set to false, well, it's no longer going to show this. Okay, so let's have a look at this now. And if I refresh, notice you see it says mounted, right? Now, if I press click me, what's going to happen is it destroys this. Now, it's saying this.props.destroy is not a function. Okay, that is interesting. Let me have a look here and see what is wrong. Okay, so I spelled destroy wrong. Classic error there. Let's fix the spelling of it. And now this should all be good. Okay, so I'm going to go back, going to refresh, going to press this, and then notice this component goes away, and notice it says mounted, clicked, and then cleanup. Exactly what we wanted. It's giving us the cleanup operation as soon as this component is destroyed. Okay, so those are the life cycle methods. Hopefully that is clear. Again, you have component did mount, component did update, component will unmount. These are the three most popular ones. There is a bunch of other ones, but these are the ones you're going to use like all of the time. So kind of remember what these do. We're not going to use these now going forward, but I just wanted to show you how they work with class-based components. And now I'm going to show you what's known as useEffect, which is a hook that we use inside of our functional components. Okay, so let me remove this test file. Actually, I'll leave the test file in. I'm just going to stop showing it now because I might want to reference stuff that's in there later. Okay, so let's just clean up all this code that we wrote for testing purposes. So we will continue in 1 second, but I need to quickly thank the sponsor of this video and this series, which is AlgoExpert. AlgoExpert is the best platform to use when preparing for your software engineering coding interviews. Every single question on the platform has a detailed conceptual overview and code walkthrough that is taught by the best instructors, one of which is actually me. Check out AlgoExpert from the link in the description and use the code TechWithTim for a discount on the platform. Okay, so I've cleaned up all the code that we had there just for testing purposes, and now what I'm going to do is talk to you about useEffect. So the first thing we need to do is import useEffect from React, just like we imported useState. Now, useEffect is commonly referred to as a hook, and there's a few hooks in React, right? One of them is useState, another one is useEffect, and there's a few others that I'm not probably going to show in this video. Actually, there'll be another one at the end of the tutorial series called useReducer, I believe, and well, I'll explain that when we get to it. Anyways, what is a hook? A hook is a function provided by React that allows you to modify the default behavior of a component. So by default, there is no state associated with the component, but as soon as you use the useState hook, you now add this state to the component and you tell this component to update every single time this state changes. You've hooked into some of the behavior that by default is doing something, and you've changed that, and so your React component is going to behave differently. Same thing here with useEffect. So the way you use useEffect is you write it like this, just as you would write kind of any other function call, but you do it inside of the body of your function, inside of your component, before the return statement. Now, you can make as many effects as you want. I'll show you how it works, obviously, in a second, but what you do inside of here is you put a function, and this function will run whenever this effect is triggered. Now, you can kind of read what this is doing, but it says accepts a function that contains imperative, possibly effectful code. Okay, so that's probably not very helpful, but essentially useEffect is the same as, if I go here, component did mount and component did update. So whenever the component mounts or whenever it updates, whatever you put inside of this function here will run. So let's just show you this quite simply. Console.log, and we'll say useEffect like that and just save. Okay, so let's just see when this runs. If I go here and now I refresh the page, notice immediately it runs useEffect because the component was mounted. This is the app component that was mounted. Now let's update the component. So let me just do something here. Tim 399 test, add item. And notice here that useEffect runs because, well, we updated the component. Specifically, we changed the state, and so it updated and useEffect ran. Perfect, there you go. Okay, so that is how you actually implement the component did update and the component did mount by using a useEffect. Now, some of you may be saying, well, that's kind of strange. I don't want the useEffect to run when I update, or I don't want it to run when I mount. I want two separate things. Well, it's actually better to have one thing that does this. I won't really get into the reasons why, but essentially you can't really separate whether you updated or whether this was initially mounted, at least not super simply, although I'll show you a way that you can kind of change when this effect runs or doesn't run in just a minute. But regardless, right now, you kind of just have to imagine that what's happening here is it's going to run whenever it updates or whenever it mounts. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is show you how we can actually implement the component will unmount by still using useEffect. So the idea here is that typically when you set something up and the component did mount, you want to kind of unset it up, so clean it up, and the component will unmount. And typically these things are very similar to each other, right? Like what you set up and what you clean up are like the same thing. You're cleaning up what you set up. And so React said, okay, instead of useEffect, we will allow you to have a cleanup operation so that all of your code that's related can kind of stay together. And so if you want to have a cleanup operation here, what you do is you say return. You then define a function, and this function will run when the component is about to unmount. So again, exact same thing as component will unmount. Whatever you put inside of the function that you return from the function you put inside of useEffect will run and clean up when the component unmounts. So here, if I say console.log cleanup, well, when the component is about to unmount, this will run. Now we're inside of the app component, which is always on the screen while the server is running. And so this is never going to run. But if you put this inside of another component, it would run when that component is destroyed. I'm not going to really show you the example because it's not super important, but that is how you implement a cleanup operation. Great. Okay. Now, remember I told you though, you don't always want this to run, right? Especially if inside of here, you're doing some kind of network bound operation, or you're doing something that might be pretty performance heavy. Or I guess maybe not performance heavy, but that is going to take up a lot of resources and take a fair amount of time. You maybe don't want this to run every single time your component updates, because this means every single time I change the filters, every single time I update the data, useEffect is going to run. So how do you make it so it only runs in certain occasions? Well, what you do is you pass a dependency list. Now, a dependency list is a list of variables. They can be state variables, they can be other variables, doesn't matter what they are, where when they are changed, it causes useEffect to update, but only when they are changed, or not update, sorry, run. So if you pass an empty list here, what this means is useEffect is only going to run one time. It will only run when the component is initially mounted. So if you wanted to only have component did mount, you would pass an empty list here, an empty array, and this means this only runs one time. So let's look at it. I just passed that in, going to refresh, and now notice it says useEffect. However, if I try to update this, so I say Tim399 test add item, notice useEffect doesn't run, right? No, I mean, we get a warning, don't worry about that, but useEffect doesn't run because we passed that empty list. However, now if I go and I put data here, this means, okay, I want to run this only when the component mounts or when my data variable changes. If this changes, run this effect. So now if I do this, I'm going to have to refresh here. useEffect runs. I go Tim399 test, add item, and notice that we get cleanup and we get useEffect. Now, why are we getting cleanup here? Well, the reason we are getting cleanup is because useEffect ran again, and it needed to clean up what was ran in the previous run of useEffect. So since this ran a second time, this means that all the stuff we did here is going to happen again, and so we need to clean up the previous stuff that we did. Seems a little bit confusing, especially because I told you it wasn't going to run, but essentially when this runs a second time, we will clean up the stuff we did the first time. So if we were to say subscribe to a video feed here, right? And then here we're unsubscribing from the video feed, what would happen is we would resubscribe to the video feed the next time this ran. And then if we didn't have this cleanup operation, we would just keep subscribing to it a ton of times every single time this thing runs. And so what we want to do instead is subscribe to the video feed and then unsubscribe from the other video feed that we had subscribed to. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. I mean, you can see cleanup is running before the next useEffect runs. And well, that's the idea behind this. Hopefully that's kind of clear, but that is what happens inside of useEffect. I understand it's a bit complicated, but you're going to clean up the previous effect before you run the next effect when it is running. Okay, so that is useEffect. And again, the dependency list, you're only going to run this when whatever you put inside of here, and you could put multiple things, are changed. So now maybe I put data and filters. And actually, if I don't put filters, let me show you what happens. So let's go here, and let's just add a filter, right? So I do Tim and I press search, you see that, well, it's still going to show up, but notice that every time I press search, you don't see any use effect happening, even though the filters would change. Now let's do this to say, Tim, let's add $4 as our max price here and press search. Again, you don't see use effect running, even though we updated the filters. But now if I go here and I put filters and I run this, so I press search, notice that you're going to see it happening again because we've updated the filters are changing, and so you see cleanup and use effect are running. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, so that is kind of the basics of use effect. Now, the thing is, you can have multiple effects, right? So I can actually do another use effect here, say use effect, and just put another function like I would. And in the exact same way that this use effect works, this one works, it's just another effect. So it's just another instance of what's going to happen here. So maybe I only want this one to happen on mount, right? I can say console.log, and I can say second use effect. And now this will only happen when the component mounts. So if I go here and I refresh, you're going to see use effect, second use effect. But if I update here, so I press search, notice that it's not happening again, right? And there you go. Okay, so that is use effect. The thing is, I actually want to use this now. I want to implement it. And really what I want to do is when I first run this application, I want to look at my db.json. I want to get all of the items in here and I want to load them into my data. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Let's clear this use effect. Let's just write from scratch. So we're going to say use effect. We're going to have our function, and we will just put an empty list for right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do inside of this is I am going to actually send a request, a GET request to my JSON server that gives me all of my items, and then I'm going to update my data with those items. But I only want this to run one time, right? I don't want this to run when I'm updating anything else. Just initially when I mount, I'm going to do this one time. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to copy this fetch request right here. So let's copy fetch. And let's close the parenthesis. Now I want to send a GET request, right? Because I want all of the items. And so I don't need to actually pass any request options here. I don't need to manually define GET because by default it's GET. I'm not passing any data, so this is fine. Okay, so I'm going to have fetch. Then I'm going to say .then. I'm going to take my response. I'm going to say response.json. Okay, then I'm going to say .then. I'm going to say data inside of parentheses. Then I'm going to say that I have a function here. And now I'm going to do something with my data. Okay, so we're waiting for a response. Once the response comes, we're going to get the response.json, which is the data that we want. And then what we'll do is we'll use this to update our data. So actually all we'll do inside of this function is just say set data, and then this will simply be equal to the data that we have. That's all we need to do because this is going to pass us a list, and then we can take that list and, well, we can just, put that in our data, and then we'll see all of those items. So that's literally all we need to do here. This should work. Let's go here and let's refresh. And what are we getting? It says cannot read property map of undefined. Okay, so what's happening here? Cannot read property map of undefined. I guess that means that the data that we're getting here is not working quite as I expected. And, okay, this makes sense. The reason this is happening is because I'm setting the data, but I didn't set the items key. So what I need to do here instead is I need to say items is equal to data. And now this should work because the data is a list. We need the key items and then the list. Really, when I'm thinking about it now, we could probably just have it storing an array. We probably don't need this items key, but this is the way we've set it up. So we'll just keep going with it. Okay, so let's try this now. Okay, so now notice we're not getting an error, right? Well, we're getting a warning, but we can see all of our items showing up, right? They're all immediately showing up in this list from our JSON server, which is exactly what we want. So let's add an item. Let's just go with a different name here. We'll go with the name of my cat, Fresca. $5.99 is the price. Type cat, brand, awesome. I know this makes no sense relative to what we're adding, but let's just go for it. And when I press add, you can see it adds it in. And there you go. Awesome. All is working. Okay. So really, that's all I need to show you in this video. Again, apologize if it's all over the place, but I'm just trying to explain this stuff as much depth as possible, sorry, because this tutorial series is for beginners. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please do leave them down below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.